Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx, and Staten Island. These are the 5 boroughs that make up the most popular and visited city in the United States of America, New York City. Today, we are going to be giving you an everything you need to know guide all about the city that's right behind me. We're gonna do this by trying to create the most comprehensive and inclusive guide about New York City in one sitting. So right before we begin, I wanna remind you guys to subscribe and turn on those notifications so you don't miss a single video. All right, now that that's out of the way, let's begin this everything you need to know guide by rolling the intro. NYC, baby. This place is amazing. Even though I'm technically not in New York City right now, I'm actually across the river in Hoboken, New Jersey. We have an incredible view of downtown in the financial district of New York City. So this is the everything you need to know guide about New York City, the city as a whole, all 5 boroughs, and all the notable neighborhoods and locations within the city limits. Before we begin this guide, I just want to make sure that you guys know that for the past few months, I've been hard at work creating guides about every single notable location, every notable neighborhood, and all 5 boroughs of the city. In addition to that, we are going to be moving extremely fast through this guide because I'm going to try to condense as much information. So if you miss anything, just make sure you scroll back. Or once again, you can take a deep dive into any individual neighborhood or borough. You can find all these videos on my channel for absolutely free, and I'm sure that it's going to give you a really comprehensive look at the city as a whole. And without any further ado, let's dive right into the guide. So to make these guides easy to ingest, I break them up into sub-subjects. We're going to start with the sub-subjects of the 5 boroughs. We'll take a deep dive into each one individually and break them down as we go. So here's a map of New York City. It's pretty overwhelming, right? But don't worry, I got you. Now let's split up the city into the 5 respective boroughs. Boom, there they are. These are the 5 boroughs of New York City. We have Manhattan, the most popular borough, home to all the famous sites that you know when you picture NYC. Brooklyn, the most populous borough, home to some of the most important sites in the city. Queens, the biggest borough, the most diverse area of the city and home to amazing food and culture. The Bronx, the underrated borough, a part of the city with a controversial past that's shaping up to be an incredible, diverse, and delicious part of New York City. And finally, Staten Island, the forgotten borough, where nature and the city meet and history is right around every corner. So we'll start off by diving into Manhattan first, but I want to remind you guys right now that if you're looking to come to New York City, whether it's on vacation or a trip, and you're looking for a place to stay, make sure that you use Airbnb, and if you use my Airbnb link down below in the description right now, you'll get $40 off your first stay here in New York City or anywhere else around the world. We'll dive more into accommodation a little bit later in this guide. I just wanted to quickly mention that for you guys if you're looking for a place to stay. So let's start with Manhattan. Also, here's a quick tip. Sometimes Manhattan is referred to as just the city, and I understand this can be kind of confusing for tourists coming into the city itself. An easy way to remember when people are referring to Manhattan as a city is just when you are outside of Manhattan. If somebody says the city, they usually mean Manhattan. Cool, let's get back on track. So Manhattan is an island and it's made up of well over 40 neighborhoods, and I've picked about 10 or so that are a must visit for you. So we're gonna work our way up from the south all the way to the north of the island and choose out the best places for you to visit on the way. I'll also make sure to let you guys know which neighborhoods and locations you should check out the full video for so you don't miss a single notable location, because some of these are just gonna be impossible to cover in a quick few seconds. All right, so starting with the southernmost tip of Manhattan, the financial district, also known sometimes as FiDi. It's actually that point right behind me that I'm sitting in front of right now. Make sure you're checking out Wall Street and the New York Stock Exchange and the One World Trade Center, which is right back there as well, and its observatory. It's an amazing place to go with the most incredible view of New York City. The Oculus, which is an incredible mall and train station, and Battery Park. Yes, this is where you can see the Statue of Liberty, which is technically not in New York City, it's actually New Jersey. No way to cover everything you need to see in the financial district, so make sure you watch that full video, and let's jump off to our next notable neighborhood. Next up is one of my favorite neighborhoods in the entire city. This is Chinatown, an iconic part of the city filled with many Chinese-style buildings and incredible food, as well as being one of the more lower-cost areas of the city. Visit the Mahayana Buddhist Temple. The largest Buddha in New York City is found right here, and if you're here in time for it, make sure you check out the Chinese New Year parade and festivities that happen during that time. Trust me, it's a do not miss. As well, really close to Chinatown are 2 smaller neighborhoods known as Soho and the Little Italy in Manhattan. Make sure you check them out, and let's jump over to our next area. Let's go to the Lower East Side, also sometimes dubbed LES. This is home to great nightlife and restaurants, as well as the world-famous Katz's Deli or Delicatessen, which has undoubtedly the most famous sandwiches in New York City in a deli. Next up, East West Village. This is home to New York City's only Little Tokyo. It's actually the only Little Tokyo on the East Coast. It's not really a full Little Tokyo, it's just a few blocks, but it's really, really cool, and I highly suggest checking it out. And we'll jump off to our next neighborhood. Let's go to Greenwich Village, also dubbed just the Village sometimes. If you hear someone say the Village, you know they're talking about Greenwich Village. Hit up Washington Square Park and the Washington Square Park Arch, McDougal and Bleecker Street for delicious food from all around the world, as well as fantastic nightlife all week long. With that being said, let's jump off to another neighborhood. We'll quickly mention Chelsea and Hell's Kitchen. These are kind of like the hipster food and drink capitals of Manhattan. Hit up Under West Donuts if you want to go to a hidden donut shop inside of a car wash, the insanely huge Intrepid Museum, which is a giant war battleship. You cannot forget about Chelsea Market, the insanely amazing indoor market, and the High Line, an old abandoned railway station that was renovated into a really cool space. A little bonus right next to these two neighborhoods is Hudson Yards with this new structure called the Vessel that's just been implemented. It's pretty cool, I guess. I don't really know. I don't really have a formal opinion on it. Next up, our Big Mama neighborhood, the biggest, the baddest neighborhood in Manhattan, probably in the whole city. This is Midtown. Midtown is everything you know about New York City outside of the financial district. It's Times Square, it's the Empire State Building, it's the Rockefeller Center, it's everything that you know. You cannot miss Midtown. You'll undoubtedly be here when you first arrive in New York City. Make sure as well to check out the tiny Koreatown that's really close to 34th Street and the Empire State Building. There's many, many more things to cover about Midtown. You'll have to watch my full guide on it down in the description below. All right, let's continue moving on up north. We're going to Central Park. Oh geez, Central Park is really hard to cover. This park is the size of a small city. It's massive. It's home to so many museums like the American Museum of Natural History and historic sites like the Central Park Zoo. Make sure that you don't miss seeing Cleopatra's Needle. This is an ancient Egyptian obelisk that exists right inside of Central Park. And also trust me, if you're here on a spring day, you gotta jump in there, see the cherry blossoms. And our last notable neighborhood moving north from Central Park in Manhattan is going to be Harlem. Harlem is hands down the most underrated neighborhood in Manhattan. It has kind of a controversial past, kind of a stigma that has stuck with it, but it has cleaned up immensely in recent years. And it's home to amazing food and arts and is the capital of African American history and culture in the United States. Absolutely don't miss Harlem when you're here in New York City. Whew. Okay guys, we are done with the hard part of this guide. Those are all the notable locations and neighborhoods inside of Manhattan. We can now jump over to our next borough, which is Brooklyn. But once again, there's a whole video I made in covering all of Manhattan into one video. So if that makes it easy for you guys, instead of jumping into the individual guides, make sure you check out the entirety of the Manhattan guide in the description below. And now let's start covering Brooklyn. Okay, Brooklyn. You're also most likely going to visit this borough, and rightfully so because it's freaking awesome. This is actually the borough that I was living in here in New York City. Let's start with the locations you do not want to miss out on. Dumbo. Dumbo stands for Down Under the Manhattan Bridge Overpass. You're probably gonna go here anyways because this is the neighborhood that connects Manhattan with the Brooklyn Bridge. It is one of the top spots in New York City to get beautiful views of Manhattan, and it's got a bunch of awesome sites that you wanna see. It's also a super renovated area that's renovated from a lot of warehouses into really cool hipster coffee shops, boutique stores, and malls. Check out Pebble Beach when you're out there, and let's move on to our next neighborhood. We got downtown Brooklyn and the surrounding area like Brooklyn Heights and other places like that. This is a sort of mini Manhattan inside of Brooklyn, but still very much its own thing in its own right. You'll forget that you're not inside of Manhattan when you're there, and it's really not touristy, which is pretty cool. The Fordham Mall is like the most poppin' area, and it is kind of the main street of downtown Brooklyn. Definitely watch the full guide on this one, don't miss it. Next up is Prospect Park and its surrounding area. Prospect Park is kind of like Brooklyn's Central Park. It's home to the Brooklyn Botanical Gardens, which is absolutely mind-blowing, and the actual park itself. It's huge and incredible. Let's jump off to our next neighborhood, Williamsburg. Williamsburg, this is where I lived here in Brooklyn. It's an awesome place. It is the hipster Jewish Latino capital of Brooklyn. It is super cool. It's a mishmash of so many things, but also a beautiful neighborhood, home to arts, art venues, art shops, boutiques, record stores, incredible food, and awesome chilled out nightlife. I highly suggest checking it out. Let's move on to our next place. Let's quickly mention Bushwick. Bushwick is another awesome neighborhood in Brooklyn. It has some of the most incredible street art and nightlife in New York City. If you really want to go and party, Bushwick is the place to go. Make sure you're checking out a nightclub called House of Yes. It's a very uniquely New York experience, especially when you're going out at night. So come here to party, then sober up and check out the art. Let's jump off to our next neighborhood. We're now going to head down south to the end of Brooklyn. We got a few neighborhoods here. Make sure that you're checking out Coney Island. Coney Island, everybody knows and loves it. It's been featured in countless movies and TV shows. Make sure you check out Nathan's Famous Hot Dogs. This started off right here, the original spot in Coney Island, and the awesome Coney Island Amusement Park, as well as obviously the famous Coney Island Boardwalk. Next neighborhood we got is Brighton Beach, also known as Little Odessa. Home to the most populous Eastern European community in New York City. It's comparable to being in a Chinatown. Everything is going to be in really cool like Russian letters and stuff when you go out there. So make sure you check out Brighton Beach. And boom, that was Brooklyn right there. That was undoubtedly too fast for sure. I know that for a fact. Make sure you check out my Brooklyn guides because I think they're some of the best ones that I made. Now let's move on to our next borough. Might be my favorite borough, Queens. Queens is the largest and most culturally diverse borough in New York City. Let me put it like this, Queens doesn't have many sites that you need to check out like Manhattan or Brooklyn. A lot of the big recommendations to visit here have to do with food and culture, so it's gonna be way more low-key. Begin with the first neighborhood. This is going to be Long Island City, really just home to a lot of breweries and residential life, as well as some of the best views in Manhattan. Gentry Park and Hunters Point South are some of the best places for you to check out views of the city. As well, you don't want to miss the Pepsi-Cola sign, which is the staple of Long Island City. All right, next up is Astoria. You gotta make sure you hit up Astoria. Astoria Park is a beautiful and unique park in the city, really, really cool, as well as the Middle Eastern part of Astoria, home to a lot of Arab immigrants, also known sometimes as Little Egypt. We like to call it the Little East, and the Museum of Moving Image is a do not miss when you're in Astoria. Next up, we got my favorite neighborhoods in this whole city, Jackson Heights and Woodside. Best way to sum it up is as follows. These two neighborhoods are the most diverse neighborhoods in the most diverse borough in the most diverse city in the whole world. There's literally a place called Diversity Plaza that is located right when you make it in to Jackson Heights and Woodside. It's home to Little India, Little Manila, Nepalese, Thai, tons of Latino immigrants, and it's just sensory overload in the sense of food and culture, and you simply can't miss it, as well as the incredible Thai Buddhist temple that exists here as well. Next up is our next neighborhood, Flushing. This neighborhood is incredible, the whole thing from top to bottom. It's really just amazing. The Flushing Main Street and Roosevelt Avenue are like taking a walk through an East Asian city. There's also an absolutely amazing Korean Buddhist temple that exists there. You gotta make sure you watch my video on Flushing to find out where it is. Also within Flushing is the Flushing Meadows Corona Park, home to so much incredible Queens goodness. Like the Queens Museum, Queens Botanical Gardens, the New York State Pavilion, Unisphere, Queens Zoo, and so much more. Can you tell I like this place a little too much? And last for Queens is not really a neighborhood, but more of a general area / park. This is called Fort Tilden. Fort Tilden is an abandoned World War adventure that you are looking for in New York City. Just make sure you watch my video on that so you can get some helpful tips when you're out there. And last but not least, I'm gonna add a Rockaway Beach. This is a super famous summer spot for a lot of local New Yorkers and tourists who are living in New York City. Rockaway is awesome. You're gonna wanna make sure you check it out when you're out there. We're done with Brooklyn, we're done with Queens, and we're done with Manhattan. It's time to jump into the two sort of forgotten boroughs of New York City. All right, it's time to talk about the Bronx. Now here's the deal with the Bronx. It has a sort of stigma behind it that it's extremely dangerous. Now while some parts of the Bronx are dangerous, it's actually statistically not the most dangerous borough in the city. Not by a long shot. It had a really rocky past, but it's cleaned up a lot in recent years. Please, please, please do yourself a favor and watch my guide on it so you don't miss out any important information, because I'm gonna have to skim through this really big borough really, really fast. Okay, let's begin. Make sure that you check out the birthplace of hip hop. Yes, it was born right here in the Bronx in Cedar Park. It's what gave the Bronx a sort of saying boogie down Bronx. As well, jump over to Fordham Road and the Fordham Road Grand Concourse. This is kind of the main, most hoppin' poppin' place in the Bronx. Lots of life, lots of hustle and bustle, and lots of really good food. Near there, make sure you're checking out the Real Little Italy on Arthur Avenue in the Bronx. It's seriously an incredible place and very far from what the Little Italy in Manhattan has become, so you're gonna wanna check it out. You got the New York Botanical Gardens and the Bronx Zoo, as well as Van Cortlandt Park and Pelham Bay Park. Pelham Bay Park being the largest park in the entirety of the city. Right next to Pelham Bay Park, you have City Island, which is underrated. Not a lot of people know this even exists. Both locals and tourists don't know that this place really exists. It's an awesome American-style island with great seafood right here in New York City. And of course, the world-famous Yankee Stadium. If you want to catch a baseball game, the Bronx is the place to do it. Make sure you check out Yankee Stadium as well. Of course, there are tons of other things to do in the Bronx, and this is just a quick summary, but if you're looking for your must-see locations in the Bronx, those are them. Remember, once again, you gotta watch that guide I made on the Bronx before you go. And with that, we can jump off to our last sad, forgotten little borough, Staten Island. Let's face it, Staten Island sucks. Don't visit it, let's move on. I'm just kidding. I can already hear the New Yorkers coming out with pitchforks. Relax, it was just a joke. But Staten Island really is a forgotten part of the city. People really call it the forgotten borough, but it is incredibly amazing and there's so much to see and do there. It is mostly quiet and residential, and it's definitely a far fetch from the downtown financial district of Manhattan, but it's still very much worth checking out, especially since you can get there for free with the Staten Island Ferry. But let's jump into the locations you gotta see in Staten Island. All right, St. George. This is kind of the centralmost city you're gonna get in Staten Island. It's where you get dropped off when you take the free Staten Island Ferry from the financial district in Manhattan. It's cool, it's small, it's historic, and you'll get a small town vibe with a bunch of cool restaurants and shops. Next up is the Fort Wadsworth area and the Verrazano Bridge. If there's only one thing you can do when you're in Staten Island, I highly suggest coming here. There's a huge hill that'll offer you incredible, super unique views of the city, Snug Harbor, and a Chinese Scholar Garden. It will blow your mind. There's an incredible botanical garden in this area as well. The Chinese Scholar Gardens is breathtaking. It's amazing. As well, if you want to take a walk into the colonial past of the United States of America, make sure you think up historic Richmond town, surrounded by nature, but virtually staying the same for the last 100 or so years. This place is super, super colonial. Really like taking a walk in the colonial parts of America. And our last sort of area we're gonna mention in Staten Island is going to be the Little Sri Lanka. Make sure you check out Victory Boulevard to see the authentic and only exclusively Sri Lankan community in New York City. This will be a really cool place for you to indulge in Sri Lankan cuisine and culture. All right, so those are all the locations for Staten Island, but also all the locations for the city in general. I highly suggest that you watch deeper dives into all these different guides, especially Staten Island and the Bronx. As well as a bonus, I want to add 3 other places that are not technically in New York City, but you can get to using the PATH train system. These are going to be Jersey City, Newark, and the place where I'm sitting right now, Hoboken. Yes, these aren't in New York City. It's actually outside of New York City in a different state as well, in New Jersey, but they're just across the river and really easy to get to, and they are definitely worth checking out, especially if you want to see what kind of more local outside of the city life is like. Holy wow, we're done. Those are all the spots. We can now jump off to another sub-subject. Now, if you're local and watching this and you're angry that I didn't include a specific area, maybe it's an area that you really like, just calm down, relax, take a breath, comment that location down below in the comments so other people can see it. And if you're already writing a really hateful comment that I didn't include the place, just get out of here. What are you watching this guide for? You already live here. You don't need it. Okay. Next sub-subject. Let's quickly talk about accommodation. Accommodation in New York City is kind of hit or miss, but like I mentioned earlier, you're really gonna want to use Airbnb when you're in this city. It's really one of the cheapest options that you have. Using my Airbnb link down below in the description, like I mentioned earlier, will give you $40 off your first stay in Airbnb. That can be 1 or even 2 nights in the city, depending on where you're staying. There's lots of affordable accommodation sprawled out throughout the whole city. As well, when you stay with Airbnbs, most times you get a host, and sometimes these hosts will actually go the extra way and show you places around the city they should check out. Sometimes we'll hang out with you, and a lot of times we'll have really good recommendations on do's and don'ts within the area you're staying in. I like it also because it has the most diversity and price options. If you want to get something really fancy, you can. Or if you want to get something super cheap, you can do that as well. As well as that, hotels and motels exist all around the city. Hotels will really range from really, really crappy to really, really fancy, and the motels will generally be kind of crappy. In regards to hostels, there's really only one in the whole city, and that's the Hosteling International location. I want to give Hosteling International a huge shout out because they actually hosted our meetup here in New York City. If you want more of a communal vibe where you're staying when you're coming to New York City, make sure you're checking out Hosteling International. That covers accommodation. Make sure if you're going to get an Airbnb, you use my link down below in the description. And let's move on to our next sub-subject. All right, let's cover transportation. I've already made a video covering all the transportation in New York City, so if you haven't seen that already, you got to do that as well. Sorry I keep referring to you to other videos, but there's going to get a lot more in depth in this one. So subways and buses run 24 hours a day in the city. It's a simple system that uses a card called the MTA Metro card that you can see right here. This allows you to access the entire subway system and bus system. Subways and buses, as of 2019, cost $2.75 for a one-way ride. This is obviously subject to change in the future. As well, you can get an unlimited card, which is what I have right here, and this will let you ride unlimited rides for a week or a month. As well, you can store a monetary balance on this card while you have an unlimited card going on as well. So if you want to use this thing for the PATH trains to get to New Jersey, you can do that as well. In addition to the subway and buses, you got the ferry system. The ferry system is really awesome, and it'll help you connect the Hudson River and the East River to the main parts of the city. They also cost $2.75 for a one-way trip, and you can get an unlimited card for them as well, and they're really easy to use with their mobile app. And they're really comfortable having bathrooms and even a bar inside of the ferry. In the warmer months, you can actually head to the top deck of the ferry and get absolutely mind-blowing views of the city, especially when you're in the East River. As the last point on transportation, you got Uber and Lyft. You can use my links in the description below to get yourself some discounts when you're riding. I would make sure to switch in between the two apps. I generally find that Uber tends to be a little bit cheaper in New York City. And with that, we'll jump off to our next sub-subject. Oh boy, I'm both excited and scared to cover this one, but we're gonna talk about food. I'm going to do this really, really fast. This city has easily some of the best food on planet Earth. The simple fact is that if you want it, you can get it here. There's a restaurant representing really any cuisine from any ethnic background in this city. And the prices range incredibly from really, really low to really, really high, with NYC boasting the most amount of dollar food spots in the US, as well right beside it having almost the most Michelin star restaurants in the United States. So I got my list of recommendations, and let's begin. You got pizza. NYC dollar pizza and the more expensive slices are some of the best rated pizza in the world. My favorites being Champions on Essex Street and Keste Pizza and Vino in the Financial District. Bagels. Literally any of them from anywhere. My favorite being Brooklyn and Bagel Coffee Company's French toast bagel with eggs and American cheese. Chinese/American Chinese food. Like the last two, literally find them anywhere. The most authentic will be in Chinatown. Flushing and Sunset Park in Brooklyn. Next up is hot dogs. You'll find them anywhere from carts to trucks. In my opinion, the best are Criff dogs, super customizable hot dog. You're not gonna wanna miss this one either. Let's talk about the Caribbean Latino food. This is gonna be Dominican, Puerto Rican, Cuban food. Get a mango breakfast or a mofongo meal. You're gonna thank me later when you try these. They're absolutely delicious and they're super cheap, especially if you buy them anywhere outside of Brooklyn or Manhattan. Jamaican food, you're gonna wanna try Jamaican beef patties, curry goats, festivals, and even more. Crown Heights, Brooklyn being a great place, or anywhere in the Bronx. All right, up next is Indian, Bangladeshi, Pakistani food. Find it on every corner, no matter if it's in a truck or in a cart. Jackson Heights, Queens is the best place to try this stuff. Filipino food, you're gonna wanna head out to Woodside, Queens, having so many Filipino spots, including the famous Jollibee fast food restaurant. My favorite spot being House of Inasal. Go over there, try their famous chicken inasal, and you'll thank me later for that as well. Kosher food, you'll find a lot of it in any of the Jewish hoods in Brooklyn. Crown Heights, Flatbush being the most diverse options, and Williamsburg having a lot of sort of Eastern European Jewish style food. The most luxurious kosher spot in the city is in the financial district right behind me, and it is called Reserve Cut. I haven't personally had the chance to eat there yet, but I've heard it's incredible. As for halal food, it's seriously in every square inch of the city, from carts to trucks to full-blown restaurants. It's a diverse mix. The Muslim community in New York City brings out a lot of delicious, ethnically homogenous cuisines from their different respective backgrounds. Don't miss out on halal food in New York. Greek food, Queens being the #1 spot for this, especially in Astoria, boasting the best restaurant called Taverna Kyklades. Soul food, you'll find a lot of that in Harlem and in the Bronx. Chicken waffles, mac and cheese, and collard greens are something that you don't want to miss, especially when you're tasting that delicious soul food. As for Korean, make sure you're checking out the Koreatown in Midtown. It's a wonderful, wonderful place to go out at night, and it's got delicious food. All right, so that should cover food in New York City. Stay away from fast food when you're in New York City. There's really no excuse to eat it with all the awesome food options that exist here. With that being said, let's jump off to our next subject and talk about money. What is it going to cost you to visit New York City? So yes, New York City is one of the most expensive cities in the world, but that doesn't mean it's going to break your bank. You can easily penny pinch your way around the city, and lots of famous attractions either are really cheap or free to visit. But that being said, it's really tough to answer this question because I don't know your budget, but I'll set a few baselines for you just to help you out. Keep in mind that these are all estimates and generalizations, and they don't necessarily count for every square inch of New York City, so just make sure you know that going in. So on the super, super low end, as a budget traveler, backpacker, I would budget yourself anywhere between $60, and that's really on the low end, to about $100 a day on the very, very low end of the spectrum. You can definitely shoot way over that or a little bit lower than that, but that's typically gonna be the range if you're a super budget traveler. All right, let's go to just around the middle tier. Let's say you have a little bit more money to spend when you're here in New York City. You can budget yourself anywhere between $150 to $300 and be sort of comfortable visiting most of the attractions and doing a little bit of shopping when you're here in New York. And as well, you get a relatively nice accommodation for that price. Once again, this is all estimation. Lastly, if you're a high baller, you can budget yourself out about $2,500 to $5,000 a day. As well, if you want to save time and you have that much of a budget, you can spend your time flying around the city in helicopters. And yes, that's actually a real way to get around for some of the rich people in the city. Okay, enough money talk, on to the next subject. We can talk about people now. And I love this part so much because the people of New York are what make the experience of visiting New York City so, so special. They are a diverse bunch, and quite literally the most diverse bunch in the world. NYC is on the top 3 most multicultural cities in the world, giving it such a unique flavor. As for specific nationalities, I'll name a few that you'll commonly encounter. You got your famous Latino Caribbean folks, whether they're Dominican or Puerto Rican. Jamaicans make up one of the largest parts of the Black community here in New York. And as well, you have many Black New Yorkers that trace their roots right back to Africa. NYC also has the largest population of Jewish people outside of Israel, including myself. East Asian communities are also super prevalent across the city, with Chinese Americans making up most of that ethnically diverse area. As well, you got South Asians and Southeast Asians. And lastly, you have the Muslim Arab population in NYC. The one thing that needs to be said about the people of New York City is their drive. When you first come here, you might take people's behavior as rude, but trust me, it has more to do with people's drive than anything else. People out here hustle and work hard to achieve their dreams, and people come from all over the world to come and make their dreams a reality right here in the city. New Yorkers are also extremely hospitable and friendly, just depending on what time you catch them and what parts of the city you catch them in. Don't mistake their hastiness as rudeness, but just more of a drive that they have to be somewhere to complete some sort of task. I can tell you that this place has had more random people spark up conversations with me or jump into my conversations than anywhere else on planet Earth. I'm being serious about that. And Lower Manhattan and parts of Brooklyn are not representative of the people kind of behavior across the city. As well, you have a high amount of homeless population in New York City. It is a true fact of the city that there's a lot of homeless people. You will encounter them left and right when you're walking around the city. It's a reality of being in this city. Just keep that in mind when you're visiting. And let's jump off to our last sub-subject, which is going to be safety. I've hammered this point home so many times in my different New York City guides, but safety is something that I really don't think most of you need to be worried about at all in New York City. New York City is an extremely safe city, especially in most regards to other US cities and other cities around the world. There are definitely parts of the city that you're going to want to avoid as a tourist. I would do some research on them before you go, but anything that I've mentioned to you in this video is most likely going to be 100% safe. Don't go anywhere that scares you. Don't go anywhere that you feel uncomfortable in. If you see a sketchy situation unfolding, get out of there as fast as you can. Just use your street smarts and be smart. This is a big city with a lot going on. There are little schemes and things that go on in the day-to-day, but it's not something you necessarily need to be super worried about or on edge to prepare yourself when you come here. So just keep that in mind, but generally this place is super safe, welcoming, and awesome. So that's going to be the end for safety in New York City. And with that, we're done with this overall New York City guide, which is absolutely crazy. This has been the culmination of the last 3 months of my life creating an overall guide on New York City. It's been a lot of hard work, and I hope that it pays off for you when you come and visit New York City. I'm gonna say this again, please make sure that you check out any of the full guides on the boroughs or neighborhoods down in the description below or anywhere on my channel. You're not going to want to miss them if you want to take a deeper dive into a specific neighborhood or borough on the city. I spent a lot of time and energy creating these, and I would really like for you guys to check them out as well. If you want to support this YouTube channel, you can by buying some of my merchandise down in the description below or on screen right now. And we'll see you in the next one. I love you guys a long time. Goodbye, class.